is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Delivering a blow to the gig economy, Deliveroo shares plummet at its market debut, wiping billions off its value in a single day.
Mapping out the path to zero. Energy and climate leaders meet to thrash out a plan to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050.
From battling COVID to battling his own military, a political crisis for Brazil's president, as the heads of all three branches of the armed forces quit.
Still fighting fit after more than 2,000 years, how China's terracotta warriors have defied the passage of time.
Shares of the food delivery company Deliveroo plummeted on its London stock market debut. Within minutes of market opening, the company lost more than $3 billion in value. The listing had been billed as the biggest in a decade, with London trying to become an attractive place for fast-growing tech companies. Nicole Johnston reports.
It's been a bad start for Deliveroo on the London Stock Exchange. Its shares plunged 30% at the open, in a major blow to the company. It seems investors are concerned about the conditions and welfare of the Deliveroo drivers, and that's not all.
Timing is one issue. Once you're on the IPO track, you're sort of stuck on it. There are issues about the voting structure, which makes it unacceptable for a lot of investment funds to buy. It makes it you can't list it in the FTSE 100, despite its size. It also has the challenges of its whole employee relations. So we've seen Uber drivers have become employees according to the courts. Deliveroo hasn't done that. That also struck it off the list for a lot of investment funds to buy.
Deliveroo has never turned a profit, even though demand for home delivery has boomed during the pandemic.
It's a loss-making company. It got bailed out by Amazon last year. They had to inject $500 million for a shareholding, obviously. It lost over £200 million last year. Its turnover is only over $1 billion. And there's an awful lot of competition out there as well. There are bigger, stronger rivals such as Just Eat, which actually makes more money and has free cash flow.
So if the company is forced to offer benefits like a pension, sick pay and holiday pay, those tight margins could be squeezed too much. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Joshua Mahoney is a senior market analyst at IG, and he says Deliveroo's disappointing debut shows the risky nature of investing in IPOs.
A rapid decline on the first day really does highlight the difficulties of investing on IPO days. Sometimes a market will rally significantly and they'll say that they've underpriced it. On this occasion, it feels like the banks have really overpriced it, and in actual fact, people not necessarily feeling all too confident about it, despite the fact that it had been a heavily touted rare tech IPO here in the UK. It hasn't necessarily gone to plan.
Is it Deliveroo's business model or consumer conscience over the gig economy in general, do you think, that's putting investors off?
Do you know what? I don't think it's a good time, to be honest. We've seen a massive run-up in terms of these sort of tech names, growth names, and certainly, you know, if we'd approached this a few months ago, 3-4 months ago, then it would have been a real sweet spot. Now we're staring down the barrel of a 6-month period, 12-month period, where we're likely to see yields rise, we're likely to see economic data improve, and therefore people aren't looking for those businesses that are, say, not turning a profit and they're all based upon, you know, what we could grow into in the future. Instead, people are thinking, what about these companies that have been hit hard? Now they're going to come back into strength with the fact that the economic picture is improving. I think that's really a significant reason why we're likely to see companies like this underperform.
Do you think investors are worried about a potential hit to prospective profits from tighter regulation in the gig economy? I'm just thinking about, you know, the Uber ruling and the impact that might have.
Yeah, that's certainly something that's going to be running through investors' minds. You know, when you look at a company like this, you've got to think about how have they been valued? Have they been valued based on one incredible year where everyone's been locked up and no one can go out to restaurants and the like? Yes, to an extent. and how much are they going to be hit by a government that's likely to increasingly regulate things like the gig economy. Of course, they have shown their hand in terms of the Uber ruling, and it's unlikely that things are going to move in the opposite direction. So certainly it's something that's going to loom large over companies like this until we actually see exactly how the numbers play out down the line. But for me, I think what we're looking at here is a growing company. I think it's likely to continue to grow. I don't think that because of the fact that we've seen weakness at the open in its inception means suddenly you can write it off. I do think it's a difficult time at the moment, and I think it might take a little bit of patience before things sort of steady themselves and get back into a position where everyone had been hoping it would go.
Josh, you say it's a difficult time. There was a lot of hype around this listing, London's biggest ever tech float. How do you think this flop will affect UK government ambitions to attract more tech companies?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we have heard from the Kazoo CEO, who surprisingly decided to list over in the US, and when quizzed about that, said that it's because the UK doesn't really appreciate tech companies, doesn't know how to price tech companies like the US does. And in actual fact, it's a running theme that you see with companies listed here in the UK, where people say, you know, what if they had a secondary listing? What if they also listed over in the US? Because of this perception that maybe US investors are a little bit more optimistic, maybe not as skeptic as some of the people here in the UK.
Royal Mail has an unexpected special delivery for its shareholders. The British Postal Service is set to make a one-off dividend payment after annual profits more than doubled during the coronavirus pandemic. It's their first shareholder payout since January 2020 and represents a reversal in fortune for a company embroiled in union disputes in recent years. Staying away, visitor numbers to UK attractions were down by 70% in 2020 from the previous year. That's according to the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions. Coronavirus restrictions meant outdoor entertainment generally fared better, with Kew Gardens in the top 10 most visited list for the first time. Despite being closed for almost 6 months, London's Tate Modern Art Gallery held on to top spot. The British insurance market, Lloyd's of London, expects 2020 payouts for claims relating to the COVID-19 pandemic to reach $8.5 billion. That's almost a record for a single event and on par with the 9/11 terror attacks in 2001. The 335-year-old insurance market reported an overall loss of $1.2 billion.
China has denied accusations that it withheld data from international experts looking into the origins of coronavirus. It comes after the US and 13 allies slammed a widely anticipated WHO report as incomplete and not transparent. Tran Chen Chen has more.
Unethical and unscientific. That's China's take on a US criticism of a World Health Organization report into the origins of COVID-19.
It lacks crucial data, information. It lacks.
A day after a joint statement from 14 countries accused China of withholding access to data, the foreign ministry in Beijing refuted the claims and said all necessary support was given.
This shows those countries do not respect science and are politicizing the search for the origins of the virus. It's extremely unethical and doesn't enjoy popular support.
The report was put together by a team of international experts and included a 4-week visit to the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the outbreak was first identified in 2019. A British zoologist was part of the mission.
I challenge those people who believe there's a lack of data to read the report. It's hundreds of pages packed with information that's not been seen before. You know, thousands of samples tested and reported in that report that have never been published. Interviews with scientists, with the original clinicians who found the first cases of COVID. This is new information, new data, and I think it's very successful, and I'm very proud of that report.
However, the WHO chief said the team thought they had difficulties accessing raw data. But the Chinese co-leader of the study says it's not accurate to say China is withholding information.
Of course, according to Chinese law, some data cannot be taken away or photographed, but when we were analysing it together in Wuhan, everyone could see the database, the materials, it was all done together. For example, some data that involves patient privacy and requires the patient to know and agree, this is a legal requirement. I think this is also a basic international rule.
The WHO report says the virus is likely to have originated in bats and made the jump to humans via an as yet unknown intermediary host animal. It says every possibility is being considered, but it's extremely unlikely that the virus was leaked from a laboratory. It might take years to track down the origins of the virus, which has claimed over 2 million lives. But experts in China and across the world are determined to leave no stone unturned. Chen, CGTN.
Let's talk now to Professor Lawrence Young, who's a virologist at the Warwick Medical School here in the UK. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme, Professor. So, do you think we are now, following this report, any closer to understanding the origin of the coronavirus?
Not really. I mean, it is a very thorough report, but it is a preliminary report. So it doesn't come to any firm conclusions at all about the origin, but it does really set the scene, I think, for a more thorough investigation.
And when it comes to the origin, Beijing's called for the investigation to look beyond China. Should that be explored?
Well, I think everything needs to be explored. I mean, there is some data within the document suggesting that it's possible that the virus was around earlier than December 2019 and possibly could have been spreading much earlier into other parts of the world, including Italy. And I think that needs to be investigated in a bit more detail. But as the Director General of the World Health Organization has said himself, a lot of different hypotheses remain on the table. They've got to do some more detailed investigation. It really is important that we identify where this virus came from and make sure we do everything to stop something similar ever happening again.
And the report says that the most likely origin is animal to human transmission. What's your view on that?
Yes, I think that's the case. I mean, I think there are certain things you can put to bed. For instance, there is no evidence of any sort of deliberate bioengineering. We've known that for a long time now. If you look at the viral genome, there's no way that was generated in a laboratory. But it's quite clear, given the fact that this virus is 96% identical to a bat virus, that it somehow did come through a bat, possibly through another intermediary animal on the way into humans. But that needs to be looked at in a bit more detail, and certainly I think there's a lot of scope for further investigation.
So you said just now that it was important to find out the origin, to carry on looking into that. What kind of lessons can we learn when it comes to potential future pandemics?
I think there's a big lesson for all of us about these so-called zoonotic infections. We know that most of the infections that we worry about and have done over the years, be it influenza, Ebola, or even HIV, let alone SARS-CoV-2, come from animals. My concern is we're not doing enough to think about that relationship between humans and animals. We're not doing enough to make sure that people like me, who work on human viruses, are working more closely with folks who work on viruses in animals, so that we can get things going together in a more joined-up way and think about what we can do. A lot of this is around animal husbandry, and it's the impact also of the way we interact with the world. So there's a lot of information now that these zoonotic infections from animals to humans are impacted by the way that we treat the natural world. And that's a really important thing for us to focus on in the future.
And what sort of data is needed to allow experts to carry out proper investigations into where COVID-19 came from?
I think what you need to do is be very transparent about the analysis, particularly of individuals who were sick very early on in the pandemic. The problem is, of course, there are some examples where samples have been taken and analysed, but some of those are very doubtful. So it's difficult, with hindsight, to look back at that. But we do know that people were suffering, for instance, from respiratory diseases, and there were more of them around in Wuhan and other areas earlier on in the epidemic. It's really important that we get an understanding of whether or not the virus was spreading earlier, and also what that connection is between how an animal transmitted to a human and where did that take place. I think the original hypothesis that a lot of this was focused around the wet market in Wuhan is probably not correct, and that's exactly what this document highlights, that there was something else going on, and it's trying to identify what is that something else.
Okay, Professor Lawrence Young from Warwick Medical School, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you very much.
Still to come, is carbon neutral by 2050 a realistic ambition? Energy and climate leaders from some of the world's biggest economies think they have the answer.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Energy and climate leaders from around the world are meeting to discuss clean energy and a strategy to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. The summit is being hosted by the International Energy Agency, and it's a key milestone ahead of the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, in November. Well, our reporter Naweed Jabarkil's been following the summit. Naweed, good to see you. What do you think they're hoping to achieve at this?
Well, Juliet, we've just been hearing in the programme, and just a day after major international powers disagreed over that WHO report looking at the origins of COVID-19, this was a chance to bring those major players together on an issue that in the long term could be a lot more dangerous than the coronavirus. That's climate change. Major players took part, including the UK, which co-hosted this summit along with the International Energy Agency. The EU was also there. The US, John Kerry, the new climate envoy, recently appointed climate envoy, took part, as well as China, India and the African Union. Now, those countries taking part was crucial because there were 2 major themes here. One was about financing, getting more money to fight climate change, and the other was about helping the poorer nations who may have contributed less historically to global warming, but are definitely feeling the impacts of it. John Kerry himself said that just 3 regions, if you like, the US, China and Europe contributed about 50% to global emissions. So achieving that target for 2050 to bring it down to net zero is going to be a real challenge. Amid high-profile disagreements over COVID-19, a more dangerous threat is looming for the world: climate change. As the planet gets warmer, pressure's growing on the international community to clean up its act. This summit's brought together some of the world's biggest economies and businesses. The UK, which co-hosted it, is calling for donors to raise $100 billion a year to fight global warming. The US will be central to any effort. Its climate envoy John Kerry signalling an end to the skepticism that marked the Trump administration's approach.
Mother Earth, the planet, is screaming at us with the feedback loops that are telling us every single day, get this done. Not to mention the next generations that are likewise screaming at us and saying to us, hey, adults, Please be adults. Make the decisions we need to make.
If the world is to reach net zero, China's role will also be key. It's responsible for almost a third of global carbon dioxide emissions, but it's also the biggest producer of renewable energy and is vowing to be carbon neutral by 2060.
We all need to work together to reach carbon neutrality. We need to build a fair and just global energy governance system featuring win-win cooperation so as to provide confidence towards sustainable recovery.
The summit also pledged to help poorer nations deal with climate change. Countries that have contributed less to environmental damage but are having to deal with the fallout. Like a lot of these major summits, the rhetoric, as you've been hearing there, Juliet, sounded right. But in reality, dealing with the issue is going to require two things, I think: closer global cooperation and a lot of intense financing. Two things at the moment that are in short supply as the world focuses on the more immediate dangers of COVID-19.
Louisa Barkhill, thank you.
So just how important was this meeting for making a carbon-neutral world a reality in the next 30 years? I spoke to Chris Dodwell, Head of Policy and Advocacy at Impacts Asset Management, to get his insights on the summit. And I started by asking him just why getting a global strategy is so important.
Well, it's absolutely crucial, and I think one of the great things about the summit today was the level of participation. So they had more than 40 ministers from across the world representing more than 80% of global emissions and the global population. So what you've really got there is the potential to reach some kind of consensus about how we move forward. And from my listening to the summit today, what I found really interesting and exciting was this idea around focused collaboration on sectoral solutions. Because with the challenge of climate change, this isn't just about, setting a target and then, not having a roadmap for getting there. This is really around how you can actually achieve that decarbonisation across every sector of the economy. And it's only by coming together and breaking down the problem and then having this collaboration of the type that the IEA is really good at convening that we will make progress. So simple answer to your question is vital to have a global agreement, but even more vital is to have idea sharing and clarity about what good approaches look like so that we can then make progress as quickly as possible.
But also different challenges too for developing countries who will struggle to commit to plans financially, potentially. So how will that work when it comes to a global strategy that we've talked about?
So what's been really exciting over the last year is the degree to which net zero has now become a global concept in terms of those developing countries as well. We've seen China commit to a 2060 target for carbon neutrality. There are discussions going on in India. Now, the time frame over which those countries will make that transition is going to differ because they start from different circumstances. But as you start to get these solutions operating at scale, the cost of them reduces. And I previously worked as a climate negotiator. I worked with a number of countries after Paris that were trying to put in place their own climate goals. And what they realized was actually having a low carbon economy is also a route to having a prosperous economy and to having an economy that delivers local benefits.
Well, we saw a drop in emissions last year as lockdowns took hold, but in December they were higher than the previous year. So what about this so-called green recovery? Is it just a dream?
So I think the way that we need to approach this is to think about how we can build our economies back better. Last year we had a glimpse about how we can cooperate and how we can actually adjust our behaviours when we're faced with an existential challenge. If we can respond to climate change in the same way, if we can use the economic stimulus to start building these new green economies, economic sectors, and focus on how do we actually generate the jobs that are going to be needed in the future. That was one of the great things about today's summit, was there's a massive focus on how do you make this work for people, for societies, and how do you ensure that this leads to job creation and economic growth, as well as helping us meet our environmental targets. So I think we've got a long way to go. We're going to have to see those same kind of emission reductions achieved year on year, but I think there's a lot to play for there.
The head of the International Monetary Fund says it's encouraging to see so many countries setting net zero carbon targets. In an interview with CGTN, Kristalina Georgieva says she also wants governments to invest heavily in green technology so that they can achieve sustainable economic growth.
A green investment push can lift up growth by 0.7% over the next 15 years and create millions of green jobs. Very encouraging to see so many countries coming up with their net carbon targets in China by 2060, in many other more advanced economies by 2050. To get there, we have to start now, not wait.
Continued growth in China has helped Huawei deliver modest annual profit growth. The technology giant reported a net profit of almost $10 billion for 2020, up 3.2%. But overseas revenues were down in all regions, especially in the Americas, after the company was placed on a US export blacklist. Swedish retail giant H&M says it's committed to regaining trust in China. It follows a backlash after its comments last year on reports of forced labour in Xinjiang. The world's second biggest retailer reported a $159 million first quarter loss. It's been hit by the second wave of the pandemic, with around 1,500 stores temporarily shut. Volkswagen is doing damage control after a marketing stunt backfired. On Tuesday, the German automaker announced it would rename its US division Volkswagen in a nod to its electric vehicle efforts. The news was widely reported, but it turns out it was an early April Fool's Day joke. VW has stepped up its switch to electric after a damaging diesel emissions scandal. Google is contributing more than $29 million to help Europe combat fake news. The money will go to the newly established European Media and Information Fund. The pandemic and last year's US election led to a major spike in online disinformation. Tech giants have been accused of not doing enough to fight fake news.
Still to come on CGTN, Pfizer announces exciting results which could prove vital in controlling the spread of coronavirus.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicenters in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Delivering a blow to the gig economy, Deliveroo shares plummet at its market debut, wiping billions off its value in a single day. And mapping out the path to zero. Energy and climate leaders meet to thrash out a plan to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050.
To Brazil now, where the heads of all three branches of the armed forces have quit in a reported disagreement with President Jair Bolsonaro. It follows President Bolsonaro's sudden sacking of Brazil's defense minister. The political crisis comes as Brazil grapples with one of the world's worst coronavirus outbreaks. Let's go live now to Sao Paulo in Brazil and speak to Paulo Cabral. So, Paulo, why has Brazil seen these unprecedented resignations?
Well, this has been widely seen as a sign of protest, as a resistance to the intentions of President Bolsonaro to use Brazil's armed forces to his own designs, to pursue his agenda and even his political agenda. Of course, the Brazilian constitution says that the President of the Republic is the supreme commander of the armed forces, but also the constitution sets and lays down the functions of the armed forces and what these military commanders said, and let's be clear, not on the record, but there are plenty of reports off the record that these commanders were really disturbed by the intentions of Bolsonaro of trying to politicize the armed forces. To give you some context, not long ago, President Bolsonaro asked the Brazil Supreme Court to try and stop state governors that were imposing lockdown, curfew, social distancing measures in their states to try and stop COVID-19. And Bolsonaro did say a couple of times that his armed forces, in Portuguese he said, minhas forças armadas, my armed forces will not go to the streets to enforce the determinations of governors. And it is understood that the Minister of Defense, Fernando Azevedo e Silva, now the former Minister of Defense, resisted to this position of Jair Bolsonaro and was then pressured by the President to resign. He was then followed suit by the commanders of the three branches of the armed forces. A new defense minister has already been chosen, General Braga Neto, who is said to be much more aligned with President Bolsonaro. And also reports say that General Braga Neto did try to convince the commanders of the three branches of the force to stay for longer, but they did not accept and resigned all the same. It must be said also that this all began actually with the resignation of Brazil's foreign minister, Ernesto Araújo, after much pressure from Brazil's parliament because of his very ideological and not much pragmatic view of international politics. For example, an automatic alignment with Donald Trump and also not fostering good relations with China. So President Bolsonaro was under pressure for the resignation of Ernesto Araújo, the foreign minister. That happened, and then as a surprise, the resignation of the defense minister, and then Bolsonaro used this opportunity to also do a sort of small ministerial reform, changing also other 6 ministries, also a move widely understood as trying to gather support from parliament, as many of these positions have been given to parties in Brazil's parliament that were not officially supporting Bolsonaro, but that have hinted that could support the president if they got good positions in the government.
And alongside all of this, President Bolsonaro's popularity has plummeted due to the country's and his response to COVID-19.
Yes, that did happen. You know, actually it was an interesting movement because last year when the pandemic began to spread in Brazil, it was from March 2020 on that we began to have social distancing measures in Brazil. Bolsonaro strongly opposed these distancing measures. Then his popularity dropped a little, but then the government started to pay the emergency grants for the population, and this did help actually to boost Bolsonaro's popularity that reached its best moment in his government around November or December last year. And again, this largely credited to the payment of these emergency grants by the federal government. But then after that, in January, the payments ceased, and also the pandemic began to get worse and worse here in Brazil, with the intensive care units overwhelmed in pretty much all the country, even here in São Paulo, Brazil's richest state and with the biggest health care network. Also, ICUs here are now over 90% of occupation. Brazil's beating successive records in the number of deaths and infections. And yes, This has all helped now to drop Bolsonaro's popularity a lot. Bolsonaro has now changed his view in terms of the vaccination. He was staunchly opposed to vaccination, and now he's changed that view since he saw, according to analysts, that this was a popular move. But still, he's very critical of social distancing. He says he's against any kind of lockdown, and still says that it's important, not only that it's also important to try and preserve the country's economy. That's really doing quite bad.
Paola Cabral, thanks very much.
Coca farmers have scuffled with police in the Bolivian capital, La Paz. The farmers were protesting the closure of traditional markets to sell coca products. For decades, the Bolivian government has tried to stop the expansion of coca farming, which produces the basis for cocaine. It's a popular crop with farmers, as it's easy to grow and in demand. A mass has been held in Colombia at the site where workers are trying to rescue 11 trapped miners. The workers became stuck in the illegal gold mine on Friday when heavy rain poured into the 16-metre deep shaft. A water pump is being used, but hopes of finding the miners alive are diminishing. In Indonesia, the cockpit voice recorder of a jet that crashed into the Java Sea, killing all 62 people on board, has been recovered. Investigators hope it will provide vital clues to what went wrong with the Sriwijaya air jet, which came down shortly after takeoff on the 9th of January. Elon Musk's private space company SpaceX has suffered another failure. Its latest prototype rocket exploded on landing after a test launch. This is the company's third rocket flight to end this way. Debris from the vehicle was found over an 8-kilometre radius from the landing site. Slovakia's finance minister, Eduard Heger, has been tasked with forming a new government. It follows the resignation of Prime Minister Igor Matovic in an orchestrated handover of power. Matovic quit after a political crisis sparked by disputes over the use of Russian coronavirus vaccines. He secretly ordered a shipment of Sputnik V doses, which his coalition partners had opposed. There's confusion amongst Germans about the latest restrictions on the AstraZeneca vaccine. Germany has limited its use to people aged 60 and above, as well as high-priority groups, after more reports of a rare brain blood disorder. Many European countries, including Germany, briefly stopped using the vaccine earlier this month while investigating clots in a small group of people who received the shots.
Well, as you heard from Juliet there, the AstraZeneca vaccine has been dealt another blow in Europe. Germany has partially suspended the jab again. It says people under the age of 60 should not receive the vaccine over continuing fears of blood clots. That's despite the World Health Organization saying it is safe for use. Ryan Thompson reports from Frankfurt.
Germany's AstraZeneca suspension complicates an already unclear path out of lockdown. Chancellor Angela Merkel has called for a return to one last hard shutdown amid rising coronavirus infections nationwide. But state leaders have brushed off the warnings by Berlin, and even the head of the Chancellor's own party has clashed with her.
Die Fehler im Pandemie-Management.
Mistakes in the management of the pandemic and the poor conduct of many individuals, selfishness in our own ranks, have led to a decline in confidence in our party.
The last meeting between state premiers and the Chancellor went late into the night. After lots of disagreement about how to handle the pandemic, it ended with no new rules. Merkel said days later it was a turning point in her handling of the crisis.
We can only restore the trust now by acting consistently and together, federal and state together. I say again, nothing will be decided in this country when the federal government and the states do not work together.
Here in the state of Hessen, politicians have not yet fully triggered the emergency pandemic brake, despite promising to do so if cases rise. Berlin is now threatening to override this kind of decision-making in Germany's states through the emergency pandemic law, which says that Berlin and the federal government has a duty of care. It would put more power into the Chancellor Angela Merkel and potentially lead to a clearer path and a clearer strategy out of lockdown.
But such a move threatens to rattle an increasingly tense relationship between 16 states and Berlin.
This is mainly a fight about political power in this crisis management. The states and the federal government, they have to work together. There's no way around it. But now it's a little bit more about the balance between this, the power balance between these two levels. Angela Merkel can take more power to the federal side, but still the states would have a say within the whole process.
The contentious relationship also comes as some have their eyes on national elections in September. Angela Merkel will not be on the ticket this time around, but others on and off her team are eyeing Germany's top job, complicating things even more. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
French President Emmanuel Macron will address the nation later on Wednesday as a fast-spreading third wave of COVID-19 infections threatens to overrun hospitals. Macron is expected to decide whether to impose another nationwide lockdown to curb the spread of the virus. Ross Cullen joins me now from Paris. Ross, good to see you. It sounds like there's increasing pressure on Macron now.
Yeah, that's right. There really is pressure on the French president. He'll be speaking at 8 p.m. local time tonight, not too far from where we are. He'll be speaking in the Élysée Palace, the French presidential residence. If we go by previous appearances, it'll be about 25 minutes long. This is going to be the 7th address to the nation Emmanuel Macron has made since the start of the pandemic. His first speech in early March 2020. He is expected, if we understand, to announce the closure of schools for 1 week of distance learning, then bringing forward the Easter holidays to have a longer period to try to get a handle on the situation in educational institutions. Hundreds of classes have been closed here in Paris alone as a pupil or a teacher test positive for COVID-19. The third wave, French government really struggling with that now. We are seeing daily cases, between 30 and 40,000 new cases being registered each day of COVID-19. More than 5,000 people are being treated now in intensive care units across France for complications connected to coronavirus. And we are seeing the death rate starting to creep up. So it does seem that the government's hand is going to be forced. It's going to have to tighten restrictions. It's tried to have this mix of measures, a hybrid model, since the end of the second lockdown in mid-December. Since then, we've had a nationwide curfew in place and a partial shutdown in areas like Paris, with non-essential shops being closed. Could that measure be extended to the rest of the country? And could places like Paris already be under partial shutdown? Could we see a further tightening, for example, only being allowed out close to your home? All those measures we expect to be detailed by Emmanuel Macron this evening at 8 p.m.
Oh, Ross, it all sounds so negative. Are there any glimmers of hope for the government here?
Yes, there are glimmers of hope, and surprisingly, it's the French vaccination programme. We wouldn't be saying that if we go back to January and February. At the start of the year, it really was a slow rollout. Deliveries went to the wrong place. Vaccination centres weren't able to be opened. Logistical problems, real kind of bureaucratic centralisation in France, slowing the rollout of the vaccine. But come March this month, we are seeing 300,000 jabs being given each day. The French government is on track to surpass its own target. It wants to get 10 million adults to have the first vaccination by the middle of April. It's on track to hit that target earlier than expected. It wants 20 million adults to have had the first vaccination by mid-May, 30 million adults to have the first vaccination by mid-June, and then by the end of the summer, all adults to have at least had the opportunity to book a vaccination. Mass vaccination centres are opening in major sporting arenas such as velodromes. The National Stadium here in Paris, the Stade de France, is going to open a mass vaccination centre next week. Dentists and vets are able to carry out vaccinations now, and even pharmacies, drugstores such as the one just downstairs outside our building, they are carrying out vaccinations every day. So if we are looking for a glimmer of hope, Juliette, it is the French vaccination programme.
They're really stepping things up. Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you.
To Spain now, where the wearing of face masks has become mandatory, even at the beach. It's part of a series of measures the government's brought in ahead of the Easter holiday in a bid to avert a fourth wave of the coronavirus pandemic. Rahul Pathak reports from Madrid.
So the Spanish government have tightened the rules nationwide on the wearing of face masks outside. From now on, they have to be all worn in public places, even if social distancing can be observed. Public places at all times, remember. Masks can still be removed when seated on a terrace outside a restaurant to eat and drink, but must be worn if you are at a public swimming pool or relaxing on a beach. Now, it's Easter week here, and the government are extremely worried about the rising infection rates across the country. The 14-day average has increased to nearly 150 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. and they don't want to see a similar trend developing like we've seen in Germany and in France.
We have just come through the third wave, and now cases are slowly rising once again. Your average person in the street doesn't realise that the numbers keep rising daily.
It should depend on the number of people in an area. If there aren't many people around and you're in a wide open space, then masks shouldn't be mandatory.
Now, Spain, like other countries in the EU, has been frustrated at the pace of their vaccine rollout, or lack thereof. So far, only 10% of the population has received the first dose, and this country desperately does not want to enter into a fourth wave of the pandemic. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Pfizer says trials show its COVID-19 vaccine is safe and as much as 100% effective at protecting children as young as 12. The dose is currently authorised in the United States for those aged 16 and older, but vaccinating younger children could prove vital in controlling the pandemic. We're joined live from Washington, D.C. by Owen Fairclough. So, Owen, give us some more details of this trial. How did they conduct it?
Well, Pfizer must be feeling pretty good about themselves right now, Robin. Of course, this was the company that scored a world first in securing emergency approval here in the United States back in December for its COVID vaccine intended for people for the ages of 16 and up. And now it's hoping to build on that with the results of the first trial of its COVID vaccine for children aged between 12 and 15. And as you say, a 100% effectiveness rate. That was tested on some 2,260 children around the world. Remember, Pfizer has been developing these vaccines in partnership with the German drug maker BioNTech. As the results say, a 100% effectiveness rate. Yes, some of the children, some of those did have similar side effects, the kind of side effects that adults have experienced, and around 18 or so children who were given a placebo did develop COVID symptoms, and this is partly why they're so confident in the effectiveness rate of this trial. Pfizer now want to build on that by securing emergency approval for this drug, they say, in the coming weeks, both here in the United States and in Europe as well.
So, Owen, why is it so important to vaccinate children?
Well, as the dad of two preschool children here in Washington, D.C., I can tell you that I'm pretty happy about hearing this. My oldest child has been out of school here in Washington, D.C. since March last year. One of the differences perhaps with how that pandemic has been handled with countries in Europe, where many children have largely remained in school. It isn't the case here, though I should add, in other parts of the United States, children have gone back to school, but it's the coastal areas, places like New York, places like Washington, D.C., and on the western seaboard as well, the most populated places where many children have been out of school. So I'd imagine millions of parents will be very happy about this. Pfizer are confident enough, they think, to start getting this vaccine into the arms of children before the start of the academic year. And that would be very interesting here in Washington, D.C., where the teachers' union is very strong. Teachers have had large concerns. They threaten to go on strike at the prospect of going back to school, even though those teachers are now considered frontline workers and first in line, or a priority, I should say, for the vaccine. It's worth remembering as well that Joe Biden, the U.S. president, has set some fairly ambitious targets. He says that 90% of U.S. adults will be eligible for the vaccine by the 19th of April. That's building on his pledge to have some 200 million doses of vaccines rolled out by his first 100 days. That would be at the end of April. But it's still quite checkered. Remember the controversy over AstraZeneca's vaccine that's currently taking place in Europe? Well, the US is getting some of that as well, or I should say US neighbors, countries like Canada, putting on hold AstraZeneca's vaccine. AstraZeneca's vaccine hasn't been approved yet here in the United States. So there is a great urgency to get everybody here vaccinated, not just children. Robin.
The rollout continues. Owen Fairclough, many thanks.
Hand washing has become a crucial part of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, a charity in France is collecting leftover and unused soap from hotel rooms and reconditioning them to give to the homeless and disadvantaged. They estimate that 51 million bars of soap are discarded by hotels in France every year. For more about this soapy scheme, go to europe.cgtn.com.
And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we go behind the scenes in the quest to restore China's ancient terracotta army.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. As we've been hearing, energy and climate leaders from 40 nations are meeting to discuss how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Well, scientists say Australia's Kangaroo Island serves as an example of the long-term impacts from climate-fueled weather events. The island's ecosystem is still recovering from deadly bushfires that hit more than a year ago. Greg Navarro has this report.
See how they just keep working.
Peter Davis is understandably proud of what he views as his livestock. Kangaroo Island is home to the world's last remaining population of purebred Ligurian bees. There are several beekeeping families. The bees have thrived here without disease for more than 150 years.
We're really not competitors, we're collaborators. We work together in so many ways. We help each other and have done for years.
But nothing could protect the close-knit industry and the island from the devastating bushfires in late 2019 and early 2020 that claimed 2 lives and consumed roughly half of the landscape. Davis tried to save as many hives in the fire's path as possible, transporting some on a road like this up to 20 kilometers away. But in some cases, he said, it wasn't far enough or fast enough.
They just burnt. The whole hive burnt. All that was left was the metal strap, the metal lid, and lots of screws and nails.
Davis, seen here surveying the damage shortly after the fires, lost half of his bees and honey.
It hurts. It hurts to see this.
Some of his colleagues suffered even greater losses. Scientists say there's a clear connection between a warming planet and the severity of the bushfires here.
It was unprecedented. You know, we had a larger extent of fires burnt in that summer period than had ever burnt in Australia before.
Kangaroo Island's economy is still recovering without the help of its once robust overseas tourism market due to COVID.
Yeah, that's good timing. They've just headed up again there.
The island is also coping with the ecological toll. Before the fires, it's believed there were as few as 150 glossy black cockatoos left, mainly due to habitat loss.
And then the impact of the fire came through and we lost 54% of the existing she-oak, which is their sole food habitat. Yeah, it's all working.
A month into a new breeding program, the birds are already using man-made protective nest boxes for their young. Peter Davis has streamlined his operation and taken steps to help other businesses that are still struggling.
We cut out our cafe and said, no, there's other people down the street that need your business. We don't, we have an alternative income.
We just have all been helping each other through the mental health side of it as well as the workload.
It's all part of a widespread effort to revive this pristine island, one that's clearly going to take time. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Kangaroo Island.
Each day, thousands of people visit the site of China's famous Terracotta Army, a stunning display of warriors and horses depicting the troops of China's first emperor. And for nearly 50 years, experts have worked tirelessly to restore the life-sized figures. Meng Qingsheng reports.
This pile of clay fragments was newly discovered at the Terracotta Army site in Xi'an. Lan Desheng and his team are trying to piece them together in the lab. The process usually takes months or even years to complete.
Qing Dynasty's craftsmanship was perfect, with high aesthetic value. We should work to restore the structure so that the warrior can stand on its feet. We follow a principle of minimum intervention and use materials that are compatible with the relics. If we cannot piece them together, we will suspend the work until more advanced technologies become available.
This is the largest of the 3 tomb pits at the Terracotta Army site. There are around 8,000 clay soldiers and horses in the 3 tomb pits. But since excavation work started in the 1970s, only 1/4 of them have been repaired. The team has spent over 2 years working on this one, and is still half finished.
Whenever a terracotta warrior is unearthed, we go to the site and check it. We take photos of all the fragments and examine them carefully to find the missing parts. As excavation work continues, we cannot guarantee that we find the missing parts within 2 or 3 years, but we hope to recover and restore them.
Lan Desheng takes us around the mysterious graveyard. That's believed to be the first huge ancient mausoleum in China. Historians say over 700,000 laborers worked nearly 40 years to create it.
The Terracotta Army is part of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum. It's a spiritual symbol of Chinese civilization and reflects the superb wisdom and skills of ancient artisans.
Lan is now adding one more restored warrior to the Qin Emperor's army.
The clay soldier is about to leave his restoration room. I'm happy about that, but still unwilling to part with him. He will return to the Terracotta Army and meet the public.
Lan Desheng describes his connection with the clay artifacts as a doctor-patient relationship. And now he's returning them in good health and shape. Meng Qingsheng, CGTN, Xi'an, Shanxi Province.
And finally, when you think of Buddhism, Donald Trump would likely be the last thing that springs to mind. Well, a Chinese designer decided to combine the two extremes in the form of a white ceramic statue, a Trump Buddha. Hong Jinxi never imagined that what started as a fun project would get such a reputation. Now, after numerous requests from around the world for a pint-sized sculpture of the former president, he's commissioned a ceramics workshop to produce the statues. Hong, who's a furniture designer by trade, says he doesn't know if Trump is aware of his Buddha statue, but he hopes the creation acts as a reminder to the former president to relax and let go. Well, that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks very much for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're available to watch on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.